There's a lot of people who work in consulting who are very, very knowledgeable who have never actually run a business. This is almost like being a coach in MMA who's never been hit in the face. I do not network. I have never, ever networked.
They take antidepressants, for example. Some even resort to drugs.
Hang on. Early in my career, I just wanted to make as much money as I could, not because I love money, but because I don't like uncertainty. My definition of success is to have ownership of my schedule.
Hi, Janti. It's very good to have you on our show. Thank you for finding the time.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Janti, I know most people know you as a Circassian language enthusiast, especially back in homeland. But today we're going to talk about something else. You have vast experience in financial sector. You've built businesses, you've helped build businesses. And I thought that you'd be a perfect first opening guest in our show, where we will be talking to professionals, sharing with us their experience and expertise. So thank you again.
I'm flattered. It's a privilege to be here.
So Janti, let's start with simple things. How would you explain to a 6-year-old what you do for a living?
To a 6-year-old, okay. Imagine that you have a big box full of toys, and some of these toys were very expensive, but now they're not so interesting to you. And other of these toys are also very valuable, but maybe now they're broken. So imagine that there's a special place you can go to sell the toys that are not interesting to you and to sell the toys that are broken. And there's people out there that will buy them, clean them, fix them, and sell them to other people and make money doing so. That's what I've done for the last 15 years of my career. And I've worked now as somebody who will either evaluate businesses to buy, that will provide advisory services over whether the company is worth a certain number of dollars or not.
Mhm.
I've worked as somebody who gets thrown into these companies to fix them on a short-term basis or on a long-term basis. And I've also served as executives inside of some of these companies.
If you could explain in simple terms to people who are not very familiar with the industry, the difference between these financial services, consultancy, investment banking, and private equity.
Sure. So I've worked in management consulting and I've worked in private equity. Let's talk about investment banking first. So if you are an individual and you want to purchase a car or a home, you probably don't have all of the money to do this. So you might go to a lender, you might go to a bank. And in doing so, you might also go to somebody who may not be the lender or the bank, but can help you find the best deal, the best loan or lease for the car or the home that you're looking to purchase. In the business world, there are companies out there called investment banks, and they provide a very similar purpose. They can provide you with capital, with money. They can provide you with access to capital, and they can provide you with advice, and they can do 1, 2, or 3 of all of those things. And that is what a typical investment banker will do, among others. A management consultant, and I've never worked as a banker, I've worked with many bankers. What a management consultant will do is you can think about them like a doctor for a business. So every business has one mission in life: to make more money than it spends. But sometimes companies will have problems, and it's because they are spending more money than they make. And that's a very simple problem, but understanding what's causing that problem and how to fix it is sometimes not very easy or simple. And then actually doing the fixing can also be not very easy or simple. So in as much as a person might go to a doctor to say, hey, I have this odd problem, my elbow hurts. Well, it could be something as simple as you bumped your elbow. It could be something as severe as bone cancer, God forbid, and everything in between. So you go to a doctor, and that doctor has training to run a diagnostic, create a prognosis, and then develop a treatment plan. That is essentially what management consultants will do for businesses. And then what private equity firms are, in some cases, they are a little bit of a combination of both of these things. They will raise their own money and they will then go and purchase businesses, oftentimes that they know have health problems, because they can purchase them for a lower cost. They will then dive into that company, diagnose it, come up with a prognosis treatment plan, and then execute that treatment plan. And in executing that treatment plan, they're able to take something that was not very expensive, make it very, very valuable, and then sell it for a very good profit.
I've seen a lot of memes going around in financial environment, I would say, about consultants. Like, for example, that consulting is Googling with extra steps, or that even consultants themselves don't really know what exactly they're doing. What do you make of that?
Well, the favorite meme that I have is a consultant is somebody who steals your watch to tell you what time it is.
It's really good.
Yeah.
So, do you think there is some truth to that?
I think there is some truth to that. And it depends on the firm and it depends on the experience with a particular firm. Most reputable firms are structured in a way where there's a very, very senior person who has very, very deep industry expertise, right? So, for example, I was a senior person in the financial services sector, and I've touched lots of different aspects of financial services, from banking to insurance to finance to everything in between. If somebody were to say to me, if I were a consultant right now, and somebody were to say to me, hey, Jonty, we need some expertise in the area of credit card manufacturing or credit card distribution, that's not an area that I touched directly. But if somebody said we need expertise in insurance manufacturing or insurance distribution, I've got 25 years of experience in that sector and I could add value. Now, not everyone has that level of experience. And then the other thing is, I've actually run businesses. There's a lot of people who work in consulting who are very, very knowledgeable who have never actually run a business. And
Mhm.
so this is almost like being a coach in MMA who's never been hit in the face to a certain extent. So there
Mhm.
is value that someone like that can provide, but unless you've actually lived through the hard part of fixing a business, there's a limitation to what value you can add. So I think that's part of it. And then I think that the other part of it is that oftentimes the way that consulting firms get leverage in terms of their efficiency and their profitability is by having an army of junior analysts who are doing a lot of the number crunching. And that can be a very effective and a very efficient way to come up with an answer. But sometimes there's more time spent with the junior resources, and there's the impression that there's some 25-year-old kid who doesn't know much about a business who's giving advice. And
Mhm.
sometimes that is true. So I think there's truth in all jokes. That's an old expression. But I think the industry's been around for over 100 years. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It wouldn't be so large or so long-lived if it did not add some measure of real value.
Друзья, спасибо, что смотрите этот выпуск. Я благодарю вас за любую поддержку, просмотр, лайк, комментарий, или, может быть, вы поделитесь этим выпуском со своими знакомыми, что тоже будет очень приятно, но самое главное, очень поможет нашей работе. Ведь чем больше просмотров набирает видео, чем крупнее становится канал, тем охотнее классные гости с уникальной экспертизой придут сюда на разговор. А это, в свою очередь, означает больше пользы и ценностей для вас, наших чудесных зрителей. Поэтому, если вы все еще не подписаны на наш канал, и прямо сейчас подпишитесь, если вы все еще не поделились этим выпуском со своими знакомыми, и прямо сейчас поделитесь, вы очень поможете нашему делу. Благодарю вас за поддержку. Приятного просмотра.
So you used to do management consulting, but now you are working at a private equity fund. So what made you switch?
Well, I had a couple of stops along the way. I started my career as a serial entrepreneur. I had started and sold 3 businesses before I was 30. I got as big and as smart as I could on my own. I just didn't feel as though I knew there was more in the world that I did not yet quite understand. And so I went to go get my MBA, my Master's in Business Administration, from NYU Stern. I was there for a couple of years, and I decided then, coming out of Stern, that I wanted to work in management consulting. So I worked in management consulting for a few years. I really, really did enjoy the work, but I wanted to run a business, not just give advice on how to run a business. So from there, I was recruited into Marsh & McLennan. It's a Fortune 250, multi-billion dollar multinational company. And I was an executive there for a couple of years. And I really, really did enjoy being part of the operations of a business, but the business was too big. I missed just having direct control over a smaller business. So from Marcia McLennan, I was recruited into a company called FTI Consulting. And FTI Consulting works primarily, though not exclusively, with hedge funds and investment banks and private equity funds to drop in and turn around businesses that are oftentimes smaller. So in the 5 years that I was there working in the corporate finance group, I did more than a dozen, less than 2 dozen bankruptcy restructurings. And so whether it was a pre or post bankruptcy company, ranging in size from as small as $2 million to as big as $2 billion. For 5 years of my life, I got to drop into companies of all sizes all around the world and different sectors, different segments, and really turn them around. Take a company that was not profitable and make it profitable in a very, very, very short period of time. And I really, really enjoyed that. But what I missed was having an ownership stake in the business. So one thing led to another, and through some of the relationships that I had formed at FTI Consulting, I was asked to join as a principal, as an equity holder into one of these companies. And I served as the chief marketing officer in a financial services firm with the intention of growing it and selling it. We doubled the size of the business in 4 years, which is aggressive, but sort of the top end of what people think is best in class. We sold it to a publicly traded firm back in 2018. I remained as an executive at that publicly traded firm for a few years. When COVID took place, I decided to transition my career, and I ended up dropping into yet another company to grow it and sell it. I did that in summer of last year, 2023. And following that second exit, that's what we call it when you turn around a company, grow it, and then sell it to somebody else. I was looking for my next opportunity. I've cultivated a pretty good network, a pretty good reputation. And so I was recruited by a private equity fund to join them to keep doing this on a regular basis.
Now you're a chief marketing officer at this private equity fund in New York. Is that correct?
No, not quite. And it's interesting because I never thought I would be a chief marketing officer. My background is more in operations and strategy than it is in marketing. What people found unique about my skill set was that I was actually able to link investments into marketing to a positive financial return that impacted the enterprise value for the companies that I was working for. And so, to make that in simple terms, I could make sure that we generated enough sales that when we went to go sell the company, we got a very profitable return to the investors who gave us the money to buy the companies in the first place. So because of that skill set and because of my experience as an executive at other firms as well, the private equity fund that I'm working for now brought me on to build a marketing function that serves all of the private equity funds, that all the private equity portfolio companies that we service. So I'm not quite a chief marketing officer, but rather the chief marketing officers of all the companies in our portfolio coordinate with the team that I'm building at the private equity fund to help accelerate their growth and improve their profitability.
Could you describe what your normal work routine look like your normal work day? What does it entail?
This is a very cliched thing that a lot of American business people will say, but there is no normal day. There is no normal day, but I would say I'm generally working from 8 a.m. in the morning until about 6 p.m. in the evening. That's a 10-hour work day. That's fairly routine for me. And then it's equally common for me to spend another 1 to 3 hours after family time and dinner time to do a little bit more cleanup work. So a 10 to 12-hour day is very common for me and for people in my industry as well. Some people will work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. I try to work 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, so that I can keep my weekends free so I can spend time with my family. Or I'm taking directives from the managing directors of the private equity fund to take on a project within another portfolio company. It's not uncommon for us to restructure some of the portfolio companies that we manage. And what that means is we might say we need to take 15% cost out of this business. And the way that we're going to do that would be by terminating people, moving operations from a decentralized structure to a centralized structure, moving operations offshore. It's really a mix of written and verbal communication, working with our investors, working with executives at the private equity portfolio companies, working with the day-to-day operators at those companies, working with external vendors, internal vendors, looking at creative assets, looking at financial assets, and everything in between.
Do you like it?
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's such an exciting thing for me. And for some people, they may think, wow, working 10 or 12 hours a day, that's a lot. But this is the way I think about it. I remember when I graduated from college, one of my first roommates was a computer programmer, and he got a job with Microsoft. He would wake up and he would be reading something on Hacker News about some technology development. He would then go work at Microsoft. He would come home and I'd see him on his computer and I would say, "What are you doing?" And he'd say, "I'm building a Tetris clone in Java." Now, this is 20, almost 30 years ago, right? And I said, "Wait a minute, you wake up in the morning, you read about programming, then you go work at Microsoft and you do programming, and then you come home and you do programming." And then 2 or 3 nights a week, he would go to a Linux wasn't well known at the time. He would go to an open source Linux meetup and they would contribute source code to an operating system called Linux. And I was like, "Why do you do all this stuff?" And he said to me, "Pretend that I'm a musician and imagine that I like to play guitar by myself and I like to play bass in a band with other people at a club. And my job is to be a music teacher at a high school. And then I like to go listen to music too. This is just how I think about music. This is how I think about computer programming." So for me, it's the same thing about business. I love building things. I love making them better. I love creating jobs for people. I love creating economic prosperity for the investors. It's just some people like to do puzzles. Some people like to do sports. I like to do sports. I don't like to do puzzles. I love to do this. So it's just very, very exciting and interesting to me.
Интервью, которое вы смотрите, снято при поддержке наших друзей и спонсоров компании ITV, которые являются мировым лидером в области компьютерного зрения. Один из главных офисов компании ITV находится в Нальчике, и там же уже много лет работают курсы компании ITV «Я программист». Это обучение для старших школьников с 9 класса, студентов колледжей и вузов всех специальностей. На этих курсах можно научиться программированию с нуля до уровня профессионального разработчика ITV. В чем же их уникальность? Курсы очные, длятся 4 года, а их выпускников ждет стажировка и гарантированная работа в компании ITV. И это все абсолютно бесплатно. Чтобы узнать больше, переходите по ссылке в описании на сайт «Я программист» и ждите информации о новом наборе. И кто знает, может быть, совсем скоро вы будете говорить о программировании так же страстно, как однокурсник Жанти, о котором он только что рассказывал в нашем выпуске.
So already being at this point, imagine, for example, that I'm a student or maybe just, I don't know, a 15-year-old somewhere in Nalchik, about to embark on my adulthood, my professional career path. What would you suggest I should do already? What steps should I be taking to be able to land a job at a prestigious, IB or consultants or PE firm at some point?
A lot of people ask me that question. I think the first response is don't assume that something is not possible, right? So it's easier for me to be here living in Chicago in the United States and say, "Oh, anything's possible." And there might be somebody in Nalchik or in Vladikavkaz or wherever they may happen to be, thinking, "Well, that's easy for this guy to say." My mom and dad came to the United States as refugees. They barely had the clothes on their back when they got here. I grew up in a small town called Haledon, which was right next to Paterson, New Jersey. I never saw anybody in my family who did not have to wash their hands after a day of work, right? So they were working as construction people or mechanics or something like that. And at a young age, first of all, I never thought something was not possible. I always thought that everything was possible. And so having that mindset is the first and most valuable and important thing, right? And by the way, being from Nalchik, we do have a Nobel Prize winner who helped invent graphene from Nalchik.
And they
Right.
gave, yes.
So, so anything is possible. Anything is possible. That's the first thing. The second thing is to be genuine and be passionate about everything that you do. If you are really, really interested in dancing, go do dancing. If you're really, really interested in art, go do art. It is almost impossible to be successful at something that you do not personally love, right? It is almost impossible to not be happy and successful if you're really doing something you love. Be excited about what you're doing. And as you're doing it, ask as many questions as possible. Never, ever, ever worry about looking foolish, because I'll tell you something. If you work for someone and they don't like answering your questions, that's not somebody to work for. It's far better to feel foolish by asking these questions than to be foolish later in your career because you never asked the questions necessary to truly understand how to achieve success. The last thing is, don't be worried or afraid about saying, I don't know. I love saying, I don't know. People ask me questions all the time. What do you think of this? Have you ever heard of that? Do you have an opinion on this? And I think some people feel insecure and they feel as though they have to invent an answer to look smart. People who are smart love to learn. There's lots of things that I don't know. So when somebody asks me a question that I don't have the answer to, I love saying, I don't know. Explain it to me. That would be the best advice I can give.
What if I already decided that, for example, working for investment banking or being a consultant is exactly what I want to do? It's my passion. What would be practical steps? Like, what should I be looking at as, for example, as a college for me? Or maybe what resources should I be reading? Or how should I educate myself to get closer to this dream?
I think it's important to have a vision of where you want to go. It's more important to choose a broad direction and to make incremental progress as quickly as you can. Of course, everyone would love to go to Harvard or Oxford or Stanford and then go end up working for Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs and Harvard and Oxford and Stanford are not big enough to support everyone who wants to do that. So try to find the smartest people to go work for. Try to find the best schools that you can actually get into and afford. And the most important thing is just to choose a direction of goodness, of greatness, and work as hard as you can to keep making progress forward.
Throughout your life and career, you've built a lot of teams, so you know people. My question to you would be, for example, if you were hiring today an employee who is just starting out, what are the qualities that you value the most?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back before I take a step further forward to answer the question. I do believe that building high-performing teams is one of my superpowers. And it's not a superpower that I developed easily. It's not one that came naturally to me. And I say this because I do believe that people from the North Caucasus, which I am one, we are not team-oriented people, right? The geography that we're from necessitated that. And there are people and geographies and cultures around the world where individual progress is more normative than group-based progress. And even just, I'm not trying to make a joke of this, look at the North Caucasus and look at the sorts of sports that we tend to excel at. You do see some footballists, soccer players, as we'd say in North America, but you don't see a lot of them. You see lots of judo and MMA and weightlifting people because these are individual sports. So the ability to cultivate a team, to manage a team, to grow a team, to make it high performing, that is not something that came easily to me. But as a business person, that is the reason I say it's my superpower is because when you're really good at doing it, when you talk to top talent, you're able to act as a magnet to get people who will maybe take a little bit lower salary or work more hours because they genuinely believe that the near-term and long-term opportunity to grow and to be successful and to learn is much, much greater than short-term sacrifices of compensation or work-life balance or things of that nature. So I just think that's an important thing to highlight for people who are at a different level in their career. Now, to your other question, what am I generally looking at? What I'm generally looking at is that there has to be some sort of base level technical competence in the area in which I'm hiring. So if I'm hiring a finance person, if I'm hiring a marketing person, if I'm hiring a creative person, if I'm hiring a technical person, there has to be some base understanding in the actual area that I'm looking for. Beyond that, what I'm really looking for is somebody who, as I was describing before, asks lots of questions, seems to be genuinely personally excited and motivated about the thing that I'm hiring them to do. I'm looking to see if they really will put in the hours and work hard. I'm looking to see if they can play nice with others. But fundamentally, we want people who are doers, people who are not going to say, let me push this work onto somebody else, people who can do the work, people who are collaborative and can coordinate their efforts with others. No egos, no pride, people who are team-based, who are group-based, and people who want to achieve success, regardless if that means that their name is on it. Because if the team's name, if everyone on the team is successful, every individual will be successful. But if individuals are trying to achieve success without thinking about the team, the organization will never be successful. And then loyalty as well. Not to say loyalty is I'm not looking for a mercenary. I'm looking for a missionary. Not looking for somebody who's looking to maximize the dollars today, but somebody who's looking to maximize the value of what we're trying to build over the long term.
When you were young and just starting out, were you ready to compromise, for example, on your compensation in return to, working for a great company, for example, and for the learning experience?
It's been a learning journey for me along the way. I grew up poor, and I grew up with, everyone in my family came to the United States as refugees from a war, right? So this abstract notion of value was not as important as having shoes that did not have holes in them and having bread on the table, literally having bread on the table. So I think early in my career, I just wanted to make as much money as I could, not because I love money, but because I don't like uncertainty, and money can help get rid of uncertainty. I've always been very fortunate that I don't know that I've had a mentor in life who's kind of shown me the way, but I've had many, many kind and very intelligent individuals who have given me moments of guidance and moments of mentorship. And very early on in my career, I met a very successful self-made millionaire entrepreneur who came here also from another country. And his name was Arvind Walia. He was an Indian gentleman. And I'll never forget the words he told me. He said, don't chase money, chase knowledge. And that is how you build wealth over the long term. And I never forgot that. And the moment that he said that to me, I said, this is a smart guy. He's a successful guy. He's got no reason to lie to me. He was paying me well. So this was not some sort of garbage to fool me into making less money. And so I've always optimized my career path around the experience and the knowledge and the ability to improve my skill set. Now, I've been fortunate in that if I've taken less compensation, it's not as though I'm, driving a taxi on the weekends to make extra money. So, I've made less money than I could have, but I've still made more money than I ever thought I would be able to. So I'm very fortunate for that.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the corporate world, so to say. A lot of people hate it. And from what I know and from what I hear, American corporate culture is kind of especially brutal. It's very competitive. It's, I think that the employees are not as well protected, for example, as in Europe. A lot of stress, long hours. Has it ever been a problem for you personally?
That's a loaded question, only because it would be like asking, do you like to live in cities or in villages or out in the country, right? So I think part of this is a personal preference. Let me kind of walk you through the way that I think about it. In the United States, if you were to look at the largest companies in the world today, and you were to look at the top 10, probably 8 of those top 10 are in the United States. If you were to look at the top 50, probably 35 are in the United States, right? And by the way, this is not this is not at all me trying to say the United States is better. I'm just making factual observations here. Now the question becomes why. And the reason why is not because the United States is better. And I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I'm not saying anything good or bad. I'm just trying to make a very pragmatic observation. Okay. So the reason for this is that the United States is a very large, unified market, right? So the European Union has more people in it, but there's different languages, there's different cultures, there's different regulatory bodies. And so it's not really a unified market the way that the United States is a unified market. In the United States, there's one language, there's one currency, there's one culture for 330 million consumers and who have high levels of income. So this is a very, very large base of people and money that is very flexible and very fluid. And as a result of this, it is easier for companies that are located in the United States to achieve economies of scale and get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. That's why Facebook and Apple and Amazon and Google and technology companies like them and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America and financial services firms like them and AIG and State Farm and Allstate and insurance firms like them are able to get so big here, right? Mm-hmm. So that largeness is a function of human capital and financial capital, people and money. What that then creates by necessity are bureaucratic structures. And I don't use the word bureaucratic structures in a bad sense. Bureaucracy is required to manage large things, whether those large things are governments or militaries or businesses or transportation train systems. Bureaucracy is a requirement because you need people to coordinate. Once those people start coordinating, scale goes up, but speed goes down, right? So if you're running one restaurant, you can make an idea happen in one day. If you're running McDonald's or Burger King or Pizza Hut, it takes time for a change to happen because you have to organize the people inside of that organization. I would say that overall, these larger organizations do create greater opportunities, but because of the specialization, it sometimes gets hard for an individual to see the value of all of those opportunities. And I think that is the sort of built, I'll go back to the example I used in the beginning. There's some people who love living in the villages and in the countryside, and that's great. There's other people who love living in cities because they love the opportunity, they love the hustle bustle, and it's not that one is better, it's not that one is worse, it's just that they're different. And depending on what people will individually value, that's one part of it. But then depending on what people are able to see in a contextual large basis, that's another part of it. And that's how I would address your question.
Okay, but you didn't express your personal opinion. So you feel like it's your environment. You value these opportunities and you understand their, their value, and you think that it's much bigger than these, things that maybe make people uncomfortable working there.
Yes and no, because at the end of the day, no matter how I dress or how I look or what language I speak, my name is still Janti Ямыша, and I'm still a Kabardian whose family comes from Nalchik, and I'm always drawn back to a simpler, less bureaucratic lifestyle. But man, it's been amazing being in corporate America. I've seen 30 countries. I've learned how to speak 4 or 5 different languages. I've got to see some of the world's smartest people do some of the most amazing things that I never thought were possible. I would say it's almost like having the ability to eat lots of different types of food.
Okay. For you, it's basically a yes. You value the
Yes, I absolutely value it. I absolutely value it.
So from people who I know who also work, for example, in big American companies, I know that stress is a big thing for high executives, especially. For example, my friend told me once that a lot of his colleagues in management, they take antidepressants, for example. Some even resort to drugs just to deal with this everyday stress. My question to you, have you ever experienced it, does it really get to you? And how do you deal with this stress?
Hang on. You can decide to keep that in or take it out. Let's just say stress is a variation of pain. None of us want to experience pain, right?
Wait, do you agree, first of all, do you agree with me that it's a very high stress environment where you work?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's absolutely high stress. But I don't think it's any less high stress to live in a small town and not have any opportunity to put food on the table for your family. And for all of the senior executives who work at big companies and make lots of money and have lots of stress and use antidepressants or illegal drugs, there's an equal, if not larger, number of hardworking people in small towns and villages all around the world who cannot find opportunities to provide for their family and will use less expensive drugs like alcohol. So I don't think that I don't think that stress is limited just to people in the corporate world. I think that it's a different type of stress. I think it's an easier stress to manage because the stress is, am I going to make more money or less? There's lots of people in even in North America who live in small towns, and their stress is, will I be able to pay my rent this month? Will my family be evicted? And the drugs that they use would be anything from heroin, which there is an epidemic in the United States on heroin use, or alcohol, and or domestic violence, husbands beating wives. So I don't think this is limited to corporate America. Having said that, stress is not a bad thing. Stress is a variant of pain. Pain is what lets us know that we should not be doing something, right? Nobody wants to be in pain, but if we did not have pain, we would not know, don't touch the fire, don't walk on broken glass, don't go outside without wearing a jacket. This is a signal, right? So it's not that stress or pain are bad. It's that we need to understand why they exist and how to manage it. So I have a very, very stressful life, but I mean, I drink too much coffee. But I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't gamble, I don't do a
So
lot of
what
these
are
things.
your ways of managing stress?
Physical activity, physical activity. I will tell you, I have met many, many people who are very financially wealthy, who have worked in large corporate entities. And I've also met people who are very, very financially wealthy because they've built businesses from the ground up. And the number one thing that I see 80% of the time, men or women, they have some physical activity that gives them a boost of endorphins and a release. It might be yoga, it might be skiing, it might be jumping out of airplanes, it might be cycling, right, on a bicycle. In my personal case, I try to walk for at least an hour a day. Sometimes it's all in one shot in the morning. Sometimes I'll break it up into 15 or 20-minute little sessions during the day, but I make it a point to walk 10,000 steps a day. There's nothing magic about 10,000 steps. It's just a nice goal for me to have. And that is sort of, if I don't do that, then I've failed for the day. Then on top of that, I try to make it a point to have at least 30 minutes of high cardio activity for the day. And for me, that'll either be, I don't like to run, but if I have to, I'll run. Or it'll be, I have a rowing machine here in I work from home a lot of the time, or I work out of hotels and stuff. I like doing rowing. It's a great full body workout. So I try to do that for at least 30 minutes a day. In my case, 5 kilometers. That's kind of my goal. And then 3 times a week on average, I try to lift very, very heavy weights. I've been lifting heavy weights for the last 10 years. And so that gives me sort of slow state cardio, walking, high state cardio, which is rowing or running or bicycling, and then strength training 3 days a week. And that's kind of been my secret formula. And I don't do it all the time because sometimes I'm traveling, but if I go more than 3 or 4 days in a row without doing some physical activity, I can feel it.
Would you say you're good at preventing your work stress from spilling into your personal life?
I think so. I think my wife and my kids would agree. When I'm working, I'm working and I'm in it, I'm in the zone, and I'm in my flow state. But when I'm with my family, I'm with my family. I'm not checking email. I mean, if somebody calls me, I have to take a call, but I'm not letting my mind wander. I'm not checking emails. I'm playing tag with my daughter. I'm playing football, American soccer with my son. I'm taking them to the park and pushing them on the swings. The number one piece of advice that I can give when it comes to this is if you're going to do A, do A. If you're going to do B, but don't go back and forth between the two because you will do both of them unsuccessfully.
I've been talking to a lot of wives, guys in finance, in PE firms as well, in investment banking. And a lot of them say that this work stress spills a lot into personal life from their husbands. So my question would be, how do you switch it off? Like, how do you compartment these things in your mind?
It's a great question. I'm probably 15 or 20 years older than you, so I've had time to figure it out, maybe more so than some of the friends that you are talking to. I wasn't always good at it. In fact, I'd say it's just been in the last 5 years that I've gotten good at it. And the way to get good at it is to build routines into your day-to-day habits that allow you to transition from one point of focus to your other point of focus. So for example, during COVID, when people started working at home, I started working at home. I wasn't commuting to the office anymore. This is when I started walking. And I said, what I'm going to do in the morning, I'm going to wake up, have breakfast with my children and my wife, and I'm going to be a father and I'm going to be a parent. And then, even though I work from home, I'm going to go take a 15-minute walk because I can find 15 minutes in my day. And when I come back from that walk, I'm no longer thinking about being a father or a parent. I'm at work. And then likewise, at the end of the day, I'm not just going to leave this home office and go and try to just switch into being a father and a parent again, and a husband again. I'm going to take another walk, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to do something. You need to build routines. They have to be routines. You need to build routines into your day-to-day schedule that allow you to mentally signal that you're transitioning from one area of focus to another area of focus. And by the way, it could be as simple as saying, I'm not just closing the lid to my computer, I'm shutting it down. Because even though it's just going to take 3 minutes to turn it back on, that's 3 minutes of pain in the butt time. I don't want it. Even if it's as simple as putting your phone into do not disturb mode, even if it's something as simple as taking off your sports coat or just changing your clothing.
And
Some
putting a barrier between you and
Yes. Yes, it mentally signals to you that you're transitioning from one frame of reference to a different frame of reference.
So during our previous conversations, you told me about this 60, 90 hour work weeks that you've had, and about the constant traveling, where at some point you were sitting in your hotel room, not knowing what city it was or what currency they use here and stuff like that. So it sounds pretty intense. And you also admitted that partly it could have contributed to the fact that your first marriage ended. And you said that you learned from that. Could you share what's your takeaway?
Yeah, I think early in my career, I wanted to achieve success. And it wasn't about chasing money, but I think I learned the lesson to not chase money. But I think that I didn't learn the lesson to not chase status. And I also did not realize that this is a very, very long race that we're running. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So what I learned is that working 10 hours a day, that's probably sustainable, especially if you really love what you're doing. Working 12 hours a day is tough, and you can do it for a couple months, but not forever. Working 12 or 18 hours a day for 6 or 7 days a week, and then also traveling while you're doing that, that's just a recipe for disaster. That would be like saying, I'm going to run a 10-kilometer run, but I'm going to start my speed as though it's a 100-meter race. It's just it's a recipe for disaster. So what I've learned, I think, is I'm less concerned about status now. I mean, look, for those of your watchers or listeners who have seen me on Instagram or YouTube, they think of me as a language guy. I never talk about my business career. it's a very impressive business career. I don't need to say that because it is, but I don't need to advertise it in what I'm talking about when I'm doing social media. So I'm less interested or excited about trying to achieve the perception of success. And for me, now in my life, my definition of success is to have ownership of my schedule, right? I mean, I make good money. I'm not worried about that anymore. That's how I define success. It's not having a fancy title. It's not working for a fancy business. And so that's, I think, the lesson that I've learned, that success is the ability to manage my own schedule. And that means making time for my family, making time for things that are personally important to me, and balancing my career with those other objectives.
Have you ever had a burnout?
Of course.
How do you deal with that?
Well, besides collapsing and crying in a floor,
Right after that.
right after that, I think I've had burnout a few times in my career, and it took me a few years to really come back from that burnout. Burnout is a little bit like depression in that it's very, very difficult to really understand it's happening while it's happening. And if you do understand it's happening, it's very hard to make change. And a lot of the time, you only really know that it happened by looking back in time and saying, I can't believe I allowed myself to do those things. So I think today, the way that I try to avoid burnout is first and foremost by having some kind of routine. And somewhere in the back of my head, I think every day I'll wake up at this time and I'll do this and then I'll do that. And that never happens because nobody who works in a high performance organization, whether it's banking, consulting, or private equity or whatever, nobody has that luxury, right? That's just not a reality. But to have some sort of routines that say, look, I may not do it all the time. I may not do it the same time of day, but man, maybe 5 out of 7 days of the week or 3 out of 7 days of the week, I'm going to try to do 1, 2, and 3. So having some kind of routine is the best medicine to avoid burnout. But more fundamentally than that, having a life partner who you have a very open and honest and supportive relationship with is the best antidote. So my wife, I say this publicly, I say it privately, and I will say it here. I would not have achieved 10% of my success without her help and support and understanding. And God bless her. I'm lucky. I've been blessed by God. If somebody were to give me $1 billion lottery ticket, I would be less lucky than to have the wife that I have. She's my best friend. She's somebody that I can share all of my thoughts and concerns and dreams and aspirations to. She knows exactly how to help me, how to support me, but also how to say, Janti, you're not being realistic. Here's something else that you should be thinking about as well. So I think having a support system, and it could be a parent, it could be a sibling, it could be a best friend, but having a support system and then having the maturity to say, wait a minute, I think I might be going down the wrong track here. It's almost like listening to your body when you think you might be getting sick or saying, I'm not getting enough sleep. This will lead to me being sick. Let me make sure I get enough sleep. It's the sum combination of all of those things that is the best remedy to avoid burnout.
Here comes an interesting part. Let's talk about money. What can one hope to earn at an entry level at a consultancy firm, IB, or private equity fund?
I would say, so take this with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about this from the perspective of North America.
Yeah.
So this is going to differ in different parts of the world. But I would say if you are an undergrad and you don't have an advanced degree, if you were to enter a management consulting firm, a private equity fund, or an investment bank, you're going to come in as an analyst. And you're not going to find these businesses in small towns. You're going to find them in New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, Chicago, which are more expensive places to live. So the numbers may sound big, but when rent is big and food is big, the numbers get small, right? But I would say, and you know, for every Goldman Sachs, there's probably 10 companies you've never heard of that are also great banks. but don't have as much money. For every McKinsey, there's probably 10 consulting firms you've never heard of. But I would say that coming in straight out of college, within the first 3 to 5 years of your career, or 1 to 5 years of your career, in most of these industries, you probably come in with a full cash compensation of $75,000 to $125,000, if I had to guess. And again, that's a very,
So
very
we're talking
broad.
about some average, just to get
Yeah.
an idea, just to
Yeah.
get.
Yeah, I would say probably around there. And then if you're coming in with an advanced degree, which is almost always going to be an MBA, it
Mhm.
could be a master's of science in applied math or something. It could be an engineering degree. Then you're probably talking $125,000 to $300,000 total cash compensation, depending on a lot of different variables.
Since you're working right now at a private equity fund, let's talk about private equity. So what does the compensation progression look like for someone in private equity from entry level to senior level to executive level, let's say? And what does this compensation entail?
It's highly variable. What is fairly uniform is that across most private equity funds, there's going to be 3 areas of compensation. There's going to be a base level of cash compensation, what we would call your salary, your base salary. The next level of compensation would then be some sort of annual cash-based compensation. And then the third variable is going to be compensation as a result of the returns of the financial funds that the private equity fund is using to buy and then eventually build, grow, and sell companies. So we typically call that carried interest. I'm not speaking about my company because that would be non-public information, but I'm now speaking just from a very, very general perspective. So let's say you have a base salary of $100,000. Maybe then your cash compensation would be 50% of that if everything goes right. So you're going to make $150,000 and I don't know, you're 25 years old. Sounds like a lot of money for a 25-year-old, but if you're living in New York City and your rent is $3,000 a month, that money doesn't go as far as you think. Then the third component is going to be the carried interest on the underlying fund itself. So the way that this works is, let's say I'll just use $100 million. That's a small fund. Let's say there's $100 million. The way that most private equity firms are going to work, they're going to say, look, what we want to do is invest this into businesses that we buy, grow, and then sell. And our goal is to grow these companies at 20% a year so that after 5 years, let's pretend compounding and discounting doesn't apply here. So after 5 years, we have doubled the size of the business. We can then go sell that business at a higher valuation and make some good money. And we're going to take that $100 million, and because we did everything we just talked about, we're going to turn it into $200 million after 5 years. That's a 20% return. The average stock market return in the United States, adjusted for inflation and accounting for dividend yields, is probably around 8%. So what the investors who provided that $100 million will say is, if you can beat 8%, because we can get that on our own, we will give you a portion of the 12% that you get, right? So what will end up happening is, let's just say that you get 2% of that $100 million. That's $2 million. And if you're a very small fund with two partners, each partner gets to go take $1 million of that, right? Now, it might take you 5 to 7 years to grow the portfolio companies and sell them and get that return. So what you want to do is, in year 1, you have this $100 million fund, and then you have to establish credibility. But over some period of time, imagine a scenario where you have a $500 million fund. And now imagine that every year you liquidate one fund and you establish another fund. And if you look at big companies like KKR or BlackRock or Carlyle, this is effectively what they do, right? When you're doing that, each of those funds may have 5 partners that are participating in that fund. And now that, all the numbers get really crazy on a really, really crazy basis. And so partners who are participating in that fund could conceivably make 3, 5, $8 million from the proceeds of what I just talked about. And if you are now a serial fundraiser, you might be able to make that every single year because every year you're closing a fund and every year you're opening a fund. And if your fund has $1 billion rather than $500,000, the numbers go up again.
But it
Right?
only applies to partners.
Well, what happens is the partners are going to get the lion's share of the proceeds, but they will extend some of the benefits to everyone, to the little secretary who's answering the phones as well.
Everyone involved. Okay.
Well, think about it like this. Think about Facebook.
Mhm.
So Mark Zuckerberg is going to get the vast majority of value from the stock going up or down. And when the stock goes up, he can sell it and he can make a lot of money. And when stock goes down, he doesn't make any money. He loses money. But even the janitor who cleans the toilets at Facebook gets some of that stock.
Mhm.
And they're not getting the billions that Zuckerberg is getting, but it's still very valuable to those people. Now, Facebook is a, multi-hundred-billion-dollar company, but you can think about it as very, very similar to the world of private equity, only instead of stock in a publicly traded firm, you have stock in this privately managed fund that is investing into multiple companies.
My next question would be about personal finances, your approach to spending. What do you think is optimal to spend, for example, on day-to-day? What is better to put in savings, in investments? How do you approach it? What is your vision?
My family and I try to live very, very frugally. I try to live well below my base salary, well below. When I say well below, I mean like if I make $100 a week, I don't want to spend more than $50 a week. I think this is just part of my family's background, having come here as refugees from Syria, not having a lot of money growing up. So we try to live very, very below our means. And we're not cheap. We are frugal. We like to spend money, but we don't like to blow money. So we shop for deals. We buy groceries, from the local place, not the expensive place. But that then allows us to have savings and it also allows us to have cash to take trips. We love to travel. That's the one area where we really do spend a fair amount of money. And we love the experience. We love the experience with our children. That's like our passion. It's our hobby. We've taken our children to Russia multiple times. We've taken them to Dubai. We've taken them to Cancun, Mexico, and they love traveling as well. So my first sort of thing is I live well below my means. The next thing is I try to always have at least 1 year of living expenses saved in cash, just in case something happens. I don't work at Starbucks. I don't work at a store. If I lose my job tomorrow, for whatever reason, I can't just go get an equal job in a week or a month. It could take someone like me 6 to 12 months to find a role at a very senior level like I have right now. My preference is to have 2 years of cash, but my wife feels like that's just too much to have, holding in cash, especially with interest rates being what they are and inflation rates being where they are. And for younger people who are earlier in their careers, 6 months or even 3 months might be fine. But that also allows us with a cushion in the event that there's some sort of really unexpected expense that pops up that we didn't anticipate. So that's my next sort of go-to thing. The next thing is I don't actively invest in the stock market. I have an MBA from NYU Stern. Depending on who you believe, Stern is one of the top 5 schools for finance in the world. I do not invest in individual stocks. If you listen to all of these successful financial investors, they'll tell you 95% of actively managed professional investors fail to deliver the average market return of the stock market when it comes to public equities. This is not private equity. This is public equity. So I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, I'll invest in Coca-Cola or Google or Tesla. I say, I'm going to invest into a stock index mutual fund or an exchange traded fund because I'll take 8%. I'll take 8% because 8% over my working career will give me a very, very great compounded return. And that's better than getting 20% one year and then negative 12% the next year, and then positive 3% and negative 5%. That's just sort of my personal opinion. And there's a lot of technical research that's shown that over any 10-year period in any history of the United States, of North America, you are better off investing in indices, which are either exchange traded funds or stock index mutual funds, than you are in selecting individual funds. So yeah, I live below my means. I hold at least 1 year worth of living expenses in cash. I take my excess money and I put it into stock index mutual funds. And I think that debt is a cancer. Debt is the worst thing you can take on. It's like putting a rope around your neck and tying it to a very heavy weight and then trying to swim in the ocean. So if we can't afford something, we just don't buy it. We have a house here in Chicago. We did take a loan to build this house. But as I shared with you, it's like a little apartment building. So it generates cash flow, and those cash flows pay for the debt. So I don't pay for the mortgage. The rents pay for the mortgage. We have our cars are all paid in cash. We just don't believe in, other than this house, there's no debt that we have. And it's just been a huge, huge, huge something that helps us sleep well at night.
Mhm. And to wrap this part up, the last question, do you have like some kind of a dream idea of the good life and like financial goals that you have in front of you?
Yeah, the good life there's a lot of people who talk about this concept of passive income. And this is it's a real, but it's not a real concept, because there's lots of fake people on the internet that say, pay me $1,000 to take my course and I will teach you how to generate
Yeah.
passive income, right? So there's a concept of passive income that, the way I think about it, it's the ability to break trading time for money and trading some asset of value for money instead, right? So let's get rid of this idea of passive income, and let's agree, first of all, that this is not about sitting on your butt and making money. It's about breaking apart the number of hours you work in the day with the amount of money that you are able to make. So if you start off working in construction or driving a taxi or working at a store, and there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. But if you start there and you don't go to work and work a number of hours, you
Have
do not
no
make money.
income. Yeah.
You do not make money, right? And then if you get a professional job, you might be a lawyer or a banker or a consultant. You're not paid by hour, but there's a correlation between the number of hours you work and how much you're going to be compensated. So in order to break this correlation, you need some asset of value. So that asset of value could be a small apartment building, like the one that I've built here. It could be a small piece of software that, people subscribe to and they pay $20 a month, $2,000 a month, $20,000 a month, depending on that piece of software. It could be some piece of intellectual property, like a YouTube series, a podcast, right? But if you have some piece of intellectual property that generates cash flows, you have effectively broken apart this concept of trading time for money. So when I think about financial success, it is to have some asset. And in my case, it'll probably be either more real estate holdings or software companies, where I'm breaking apart my trading of time for money. But I do have a small software company and I do have a real estate company, that I have a management company that manages this building. It does take time. The building needs maintenance, it needs repair. It's a great building, but every building needs maintenance and repair. My software company needs maintenance and repair. But the software is working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This building is working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if I'm sick or I'm tired or I'm on vacation, it's continuing to produce cash flow. So for me personally, my sort of near-term goal is to make sure that all of my living expenses are paid for by things that are called things not my job. And that then allows me to be more selective about jobs I might want to take or might not take, and how hard I want to work in those jobs. And I've made a lot of progress in that regards, but that's probably what's sort of the next 5 years for me, is to say, I'm now financially independent. That doesn't mean I'm rich and I'm retired. It means that if I don't want to work a job, I don't have to. And if I do want to work a job, it's not because of the money, it's because of the intellectual stimulation, the team, the challenge, the opportunity.
Let's talk a little bit about everyday habits and lifestyle. You basically already touched upon that a little bit when you were talking about your ways to avoid burnout, to stay, active, to stay fit. But maybe there is something else that you can share as well. What are some habits that you think have a positive impact on your life and on your professional career?
I have this concept that I've never heard anybody else use, but I call it my time budget. And so for me, there's things that are very, very important in my personal life. Um, Time with my family is first and foremost. Time to focus on my physical health by walking, by lifting weights. Once a week, I go to a sauna, and I go back and forth between the sauna and a cold plunge. Doing that at least once every 2 weeks, but preferably once a week. That's very important to me. Improving my circadian is very, very important to me. Improving my Russian is also very, very important to me. And finding time to work on helping other people to learn circadian is very important to me. And then, my faith, my personal views, and finding time to read everything, business, religion, personal stuff, history. These are things that are very important to me. So if I find that my time budget is causing me to create a deficit in one of these areas, I find that I become grumpy and unhappy. And that's not good for me. It's not good for my colleagues at work. It's not good for my family. I think emotionally, it's very important for all of us to sit down and be very honest about what are the things that we have to do, what are the things we want to do, and what are the things that we would like to do, right? Needs, wants, and desires. And then to make sure that we have enough time to get to enough of them. That's number one. And the other thing is I'm a huge, huge user of to-do lists. People often ask me, like, what software do you use to be productive? If you have a productive mindset and you're very clear and crisp in your mind about what needs to get done, it doesn't matter what software you're using. If you're very muddled in your mind, if you're dishonest with yourself about what you really want to get done and what you need to get done and what other people are relying on you to get done, then it doesn't matter what software you're using, you will never, ever be successful.
Do you ever have problems with procrastination, for example? Never.
No. Look, Saturdays and Sundays, I'll wake up and I'll stay in bed for an hour and I'll drink coffee and I'll just sort of relax. I give myself times in the week to say it's okay to do nothing. Absolutely. But I don't have a problem with procrastination. I have a problem with overestimating what I can get done in a day. There's a famous quote attributed to Bill Gates that most people overestimate what they can get done in a day, but they underestimate what they can achieve in a year, right? So I think having a pragmatic approach, that's really, really important as well.
And in terms of your career, for example, how do you grow your network? Because it's a very important part of being a professional and, having a full-time job, being a father of four. Where do you find this time to grow your network and to stay in touch with all the people that you want to stay in touch with?
Well, I think there's two questions that you asked there. You asked it as one, but I actually think it's two separate questions. I've said this now on multiple podcasts. I say this privately, I say it publicly, and I've said this for the last 10 years. I do not network. I have never, ever networked. People say, well, how do you build your network? It's very, very simple. And younger people are going to say, he's going to tell us a secret. And then I'm going to say it and they're going to say, that's not what I want to do. That's not the secret. And it's because the secret is hard to do. So here's my advice to build your network. Show up. Show up. Show up for the job. Show up for the work with enthusiasm, with excitement, and do it on time. You know, being 5 minutes late all the time will destroy your reputation. Being 5 minutes early will build your reputation. That's a 10-minute difference. That's nothing, but it's everything. So show up on time, add value, right? Do the thing people ask you to do, and then ask them why they want you to do it, and see if you can find a better way to do it. Or you can do something different in addition to what you were asked for that adds even more value, right? Don't walk into work saying, well, you're only paying me to do. No, 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 no. They're paying you to add value, right? Show up on time, add value, and be kind. And the last thing is do what you say and say what you do. Mm-hmm. If you do those things most of the time, you will build a reputation. And I'll tell you, the second part of your question is how do you keep in touch with people? I don't get to talk to everyone that I'd like to as often as I do, but because I try to do the things that I just said, there's literally people that I may go 5 or even 10 years not talking to, but when I pick up the phone or I send an email, those people think, oh, that Janti guy, yeah, he's a good guy. I'm going to talk to that guy. I'm going to return his call. And so I've never tried to network. And the opposite of it, I have people, hey, Janti, it's been a while since we caught up. Let's chat. I want to be nice, but I don't have time to chat. If you need help, I'll give you help. But don't, part of my language here, don't bullshit me that you want to just catch up. If you want something, tell me. That's because I'm nice. I'm kind. I do what I just said, you know?
But okay, for example, right now you're at this point in your career where maybe people want to network with you. But when you were younger, have you ever called somebody and asked for lunch, for example, to just, you know, get acquainted, to maybe present yourself, to maybe, you know, because you say build a reputation. I totally get that. That's fair. But it's kind of building a stronger connection with the people you already know, you already work with. What about reaching beyond this circle?
I think everyone is looking for maximum value. If you reach out to somebody, so let's just say I'm Janti from 20 years ago. So I'm in my mid-20s and there's somebody that I want to go network with, right? And I say to that person, let's have lunch together, right? And this person is now 50 years old.
Okay.
By doing that, I am taking value away from this person because this person does not need me to buy him lunch. He has his own money. And 30 minutes of this person's time is very valuable because that's 30 minutes that he could spend with his wife, with his children, going to the gym, solving a business problem, and he has no idea who I am, right? So doing what you just said is like the corporate version of begging for change in the street. Yeah, $1, a euro, a pound, it's not going to make me less wealthy, but I don't know who that person is. And this is now an uneven value exchange with somebody that I don't know. Why would I take?
What if it's even? What if, for example, I try to network with people on my level as well, trying to just find out, for example, maybe there is a job there, or maybe they are interested.
So this is different. This is different. So let me, whether it's somebody who's a peer or whether it's somebody who's more advanced in their career, right? I've done this many times in my career, many times, and I have no shame about it, where I've reached out to somebody and I've said, hi, Liana, it's been a while since we've spoken. I've always thought you to be kind and intelligent, and I need some advice. Can we find some time for you to give me advice?
Yes.
Super direct. And why is this now a different exchange of value? I'll tell you why. Because people who truly are kind and intelligent and want to help, they want to help. So when you say you're kind and intelligent and I would value your advice, can you help me? It's very direct, and only the most cold-hearted person is going to say no. But that's not networking. That's just being honest about it. And then, by the way, when I have those conversations, I always end them with, thank you so much. You have no idea how helpful this is for me. If there's ever anything I can do for you, the door is open. I always say that. And by the way, something I learned a couple years ago is after people started asking me for advice, and like this is me modeling good behavior in this American corporate world, which is still foreign to me because my parents are from, the Middle East. I was shocked. I got to a certain level of my career where somebody would say, hey, Janti, I need help, I need advice, whatever. And then in the last 5 minutes of the conversation, the person would say, how can I help you? And I thought, wow, I thought you wanted help from me. Like, no, I did, and I do, and you gave me help. How can I help you? Well, what do you mean? Well, what are you doing every day? What's your job? What people are you trying to talk to? What deals are you trying to get done? What people are you trying to get hired? If you tell me what you're doing, take the last 5 minutes of that conversation, tell me what you do every day. What are the top 3 problems that you face, and how can they be solved? And when I'm out there talking to people, like for example, Liana, at the end of this interview, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to get more business people with a certain profile onto my podcast. Great. I talk to people like that all the time. I know people you don't. I have 3 people that I can put in front of you that might be interesting to you. It's a much more honest and direct way. And by the way, it's also more precise. Hey, I want to network and have lunch and pick your brain. Why? I need advice because I'm not sure what to do with my career. I need advice because I want to quit, but I don't have a second job and my boss is killing me. I need advice because I'm very loyal to my boss, but I got a competing job offer and I wasn't even looking for it, but I don't want my boss to think that I'm not loyal by asking him for more money. That's a very, very specific request. And so that would be my advice. And it's not about networking. It's just about being very frank and honest. And by the way, if you are frank and honest, the people who will actually help you will. And the people who are going to not give you time, no matter what else you might have tried, they never would have given you time or help anyways.
Janti, how do you consume information? Where do you go to stay on top of important news for you?
First of all, in some ways, I consume more information than most people, and I consume less information than some people. I think that, especially right now, and especially, it's not even a Western thing, most news is not created to give valuable information. It's created to shock you so that you spend more time in front of whatever screen or web browser or mobile device the creator of that news wants so they can get advertising revenue. I don't really consume news the way most people consume news. I think that if something is truly important and it's going to affect me, it'll find a way into my life, right? There's an earthquake someplace that's important to me, it'll find a way into my life. If the stock market goes down, it'll find a way into my life. So I don't really consume a lot of news. I will scan headlines across a variety of different news sources, and that's kind of how I consume news. And I try to make sure that the vast majority of the news sources that I scan are not US based. They're English because that's my primary language, but they're not US based because
Why?
I think that I think every place in the world has a certain level of bias. And I think that in the US, this concept of news, there was a time, I believe, in the US where news was considered a public good that was required for a healthy democracy. And for a very, very long time, there were specific laws in the United States that prevented newspapers, TV stations, or radio stations from getting so large that they could dominate a region. Many of those laws were repealed over the last 10 years. And so I think that news has transformed from what I would call a public good into a for-profit enterprise. And the purpose now of most news media organizations in the United States is not to convey information that's helpful to democracy, it's to maximize advertising revenue. And I don't think that if you want to maximize ad revenue, you need to shock and annoy people. And that is the exact opposite of giving helpful and factual news. So that's how I consume news.
If we talk about resources and, for example, apps on your phone, which do you use more often than others, for example?
I use my email and calendar apps more than anything else. I use Atlassian apps, so Jira and Confluence. A lot of what we do, a lot of the business that we invest into are software companies. And so we've adopted agile development methodologies to the business world. So we use Jira boards to track a lot of the day-to-day operations of the businesses that I oversee. We also use Confluence instead of Microsoft Word documents or Google Docs or PowerPoint presentations, because I just think it's a cleaner, simpler, easier way to track information. Those are probably the apps that I use the most. There's a little um, to-do list app on my phone called Todoist, Todoist. And so I use that just to keep track of tasks. And then Notion, which is just a note-taking app. Those are probably the apps I use the most. And then WhatsApp to keep in touch with my friends and family, some of my colleagues as well. And I would say that those apps probably take up 80% of my usage on the phone. And then I would say the next thing, which is, maybe 5% of my usage would be Reddit. I like to go on Reddit.
Oh, really? Why? What do you like about it?
I like the fact that it's user-generated content. When I look for like reviews or advice, I'll almost always type how to do something or what's the best something Reddit, because I'm sure at this point there's probably some corporations that are planting information on Reddit, but I think more often than not, people talk very genuinely about products or services or how to solve a problem, as opposed to having some fake review on some website that is getting paid by a corporation.
And lastly, Janti, you already said that at this point you prefer talking to people to get some valuable information, but still, are there any podcasts or books you think is important for young professionals to listen to?
I like listening to a podcast called This American Life. And it's not because it has the word American in it. I like podcasts that tell stories about real people's lives and just how they overcame things or experienced things. So This American Life is just a collection of stories of people who live in America. I enjoy that. There's another podcast I like called Planet Money. And what I like about it is it's a combination of the economy and business and personal experiences with both. There's a great podcast out there called How I Built This. And How I Built This is a podcast around, they'll take very successful business people and they'll say, how did you grow up? What motivated you to do this? What made you think you could? And I'll tell you, the common thing in listening to all these podcasts is that even the most successful self-made billionaires that are out there were multiple times where they almost gave up, right? So How I Built This is a great podcast from that regard. There's another one called Dark Web Diaries, or it might be Dark Net Diaries. The podcast host is named Jack Reciter, and it's all about the dark web, the dark net, the underbelly of hacking. And he really took a lot of his inspiration from the format of This American Life. So he tells a story from the perspective of somebody who experienced something bad from a hacking event, or somebody who solved something bad from a hacking event. And he'll actually interview all the people who are part of this. And it's got narration, he's got music, all this other stuff. So I really enjoy that. There's a podcast out there called Startups for the Rest of Us. And the guy who runs the podcast is named Rob Waller. Rob Waller is a several-time serial entrepreneur. He's built and sold multiple companies from scratch without outside investment. I just think he's an awesome, pragmatic, very, very genuine guy. He also runs a YouTube channel called MicroConf, which is for bootstrapped B2B SaaS founders, business-to-business software as a service, B2B SaaS founders. Those are some of the things that I listen to.
Janti, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience, your expertise. It's been most interesting and illuminating, I would say. In the end, I would like to share with you my idea for this project. It's not only to film these interviews and podcasts, but also to create some sense of community and connection between the guests that come on the show and the active viewers. So my suggestion now would be for you to maybe come up with a task for our viewers, something they can write in the comments, and maybe later you could pick a winner who would get, for example, in exchange, a one-on-one coaching session with you where he can ask his personal questions that apply to his specific life situation, to his goals. So what task do you think you could maybe give to our viewers?
I want to go back to this quote that I hope I got from the right person, which is most people overestimate what they can do in a day, but they underestimate what they can do in a year. So I would challenge your listeners, your watchers, to put into the comments some clear definition of where they would like to be in 5 years, and then very tangible, actionable steps they can take in the next 5 weeks that'll point them in that right direction. And whoever has the most clearly articulated vision, I would be happy to sit down with them for an hour and answer any questions they have, provide any advice that I can on how we can make their vision a reality.
Great, let's do that. And then we will pick a winner and we will announce it in our next episode. So stay tuned. Thank you, Janti.
My pleasure.